Okay, people, good afternoon. Uh, First of all, we would like to remind you who we are. My name is Denis Bushlatov, and this is Yaroslav Uspensky. We're two Ukrainian guys. We're trying to explain, first of all, to ourselves and to whoever wants to listen to us, the logics, the mechanics of the greatest war in the 21st century, the war which is taking place right here, right now in Ukraine. We're not politicians, we're not analytics, we're simple people. We're just trying to understand what in the world is going on. Thank you very much for joining us. And Today we wanted to talk about history, but that was a couple of weeks ago. We wanted to tell you about the beginning of Ukrainian war, but we shall have to postpone this podcast due to the fact a lot of things happened since that time. A lot of horrible things happened that shocked us. So we'll be talking about Russians hitting on the electrical system of Ukraine. We'll tell you what happened. We'll tell you about these attacks. We'll tell you how we're surviving right now. And I hope that it will be of great interest to you guys. So, sorry for not appearing for a long time. I promise you that we'll do our best to make more podcasts in a short period of time. Okay, let's I still want to start from history. Slav, I think that Russia has a great tendency to hit civil targets. For example, back in 1983, Soviet Union hit Boeing 747, which belonged to South Korean Airlines, if I'm not mistaken. And at that time, Soviet Union declined that it had anything to do with this catastrophe, but in a couple of weeks or maybe in a couple of months, I don't remember, they've admitted that unfortunately Soviet rocket was the cause of this catastrophe. Do you remember that story?
Well, I don't really remember it because I was in the first grade of school.
Sure.
However, uh, actually, the story is horrendous just because the decision to destroy this large aircraft and basically for military professional operating a radar, it was absolutely obvious that this could not be a spy plane as it was claimed by the Soviet Union. Yes, if they claimed it was a B-52 full of nukes, at least, this would have sounded rational.
No,
But
actually, I read about this story a lot, and there is a recording of communication between a pilot, not a pilot, between the missile operator and his commander. And the missile operator asked 3 or 4 times, "Are you sure I'm supposed to hit this target?" And the guy said, "Yes, go ahead." So they knew initially that that was a passenger airplane full of innocent people, uh, which definitely had nothing to do with espionage or anything like that. But of course,
mm,
what we can say, it was back in the Soviet Union, and Russia officially inherited all the sins and virtues of Soviet Union. And back in 2014, they did it again with a Malaysian Boeing aircraft.
well, this I remember clearly because almost 300 people died, ranging from babies to a grandmother of King of Thailand. So, on this aircraft, uh, by the way, goes the huge court trial. So, unlike the Korean Boeing, which was kind of forgiven, ultimately, as the Soviet Union has disappeared, and the perpetrators from back then they are long dead. The Malaysian Boeing, it caused a court hearing. It was well investigated. Evidence was collected, and the both sides were heard in court, and it was found. And there is a very decisive evidence pointing that this was a mass murder perpetrated in a premeditated state. So, in this situation, uh, all the proof is at hand. It's not possible to say that, look, this looked like a really scary airplane and like we were drinking too much vodka or whatever they were saying back in
No, I'm
1980s.
sorry. I'm sorry. I have to interrupt you. But if in 1983, Soviet Union admitted that Soviet missile was responsible for destroying a passenger airplane. In 2014, Russia declined that it had anything to do with this catastrophe. More to say, they said that it was a Ukrainian missile which was shot from the Ukrainian side, even though on every video it is absolutely obvious that the missile was shot from the place which was controlled by Russian forces. That is A. And B, Ukraine simply doesn't have a single missile system like that, which is at least it didn't have it at that time back in 2014.
Well, I
So
wouldn't hate to argue, with the experts, because yes, it was just unlikely coincidence that they used this slightly more modern version of this classic Soviet missile launcher.
mhm.
There were much crazier things happening because, for example, the initial shooting down of both airplanes, and at first the decline, to command decision to pretend it was something different happening. Well, it was, I guess, premeditated both times, but this time the strategy was also the same because Soviet Union was making up some stories, and in 21st century Russian propaganda they had 100 or maybe 1,000 more opportunities to create crazy stories. They have created a fake a person, so-called Spanish flight dispatcher, the
Oh
person who
yeah.
was supposedly like telling stories how the say Ukrainian airplane, which is like at least 3 times smaller than necessary to fly to this height. Mm, and there was a claim that the airplane shut down the Boeing. Then there was a claim that Ukraine shot it. There were claims that nobody died, but the dead bodies were put in the empty airplane. So basically, to the every step of the story, there was, some fairy tale, well, very much in the style, if not of Russia, but at least of the, orcs who tend to change the reality to its opposite and call good evil and vice versa. So, yeah, this time I mean it. We're lucky that there was a court investigation and court hearing, and judge has ruled.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. And a
So the
couple of
court
days
can,
ago, there was another court trial which actually ended this story, not in favor of Russian Federation. But it should have taught us, it should have taught the world that Russia has a tendency to lie 24/7. And their lies are extremely childish. Because instead of creating something really, creative, they come up with all sorts of degenerative and useless bullcrap, which is an obvious lie even to a 5-year-old kindergarten joiner. Uh, and same thing happened with the war that is going on right now. Because if you remember, back in February, when the war only started, I mean the hot phase of this war, Russia claimed that it only hits military targets, only military targets. More to say, they've been saying that from every TV screen, from every program, from every propaganda newspaper and site. They've been repeating one and the same phrase that they're only fighting with the army. with the Ukrainian army, which is full of natives and drug addicts and all sorts of things. So they were fighting with an army, but then when Russia was shelling the city of Mariupol, uh, they've destroyed, for example, on the 9th of March, they've destroyed an infantry hospital and 5 people died. The bloody infantry hospital. And immediately after that, what they said was that that infantry hospital was actually used as a base of Ukrainian army or something like that, even though there was no Ukrainian army in that place, obviously. And then on the 16th of March, shortly after, they have shelled the academic theater in Mariupol, despite the fact there were over 600 innocent people and children hiding from shellings there. And Russian military definitely knew that because there were, the huge words, children, which were written right near that place. And these words were visible to anybody who has eyes. So they have shelled the theater, and after they've done that, they said that they have not done that. So they have dropped a bomb, and immediately after that, they said that they've never done that.
Well, unfortunately, Dennis, you may be still not believing your eyes, because when you're saying like a childish excuse, etc., you might be refusing the harsh reality. And even if this children's hospital with a maternity ward was really an hospital not for infants but for the infantry, which is military, still there is such a notion as international law. And this law also stipulates very clearly that it's not allowed to bomb hospitals. There was a famous attack by a submarine in World War II on the German large passenger ship converted into hospital. And this
Yeah.
was also a war crime. So regardless what they're saying, the writing children, for example, or people on the civilian vehicles, or the white helmets and white markings on the journalists, or the red crosses on medics, they're all supposed to be respected by international law, namely the Geneva Convention, and there is absolutely no way to go around this fact. Like, there are two sides to every story. There can be even more interpretations. That's how the courts work. However, the fact is there is the law and there is a violation, and whatever is the lie, it cannot impact or change the reality of the fact that the maternity ward full of pregnant ladies was bombed. And you might also remember that Russian propaganda also tried to debunk the story, and they made up some fake about this poor lady who was wounded and who was a hero of a few journalists' reports. So even in such an obvious case, there was still an attempt to alter the reality. However, it's obvious that it's not the reality that's different for the people who are Ruskies in mind. It's their values, their attitude to reality, to other people, is alternative. It's not their view on the world. It's their actions are different from normal people. There is no
You're
going
absolutely
around.
right. You're right. And at the same time, I hate to be cynical, but I have to say that there are different levels of atrocity. One thing is when a soldier who has prison behind him, who has a difficult childhood, who is psychologically unstable, shoots a journalist or shoots a doctor or shoots an innocent civilian. This is one thing. This guy is a delinquent, of course, but it's his own decision. Another thing is when a missile hits a place where 600 innocent people are hiding from destruction and death. This atrocity cannot be caused by a decision of one person, of a missile operator, of a pilot, of whoever. No, 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 because this guy sees a sign that says innocent people inside. Please don't shoot, that sign says. So what this guy does, he contacts his commander, who is a general, and asks him if he still has to shoot to bomb this place. And the general says, "Oh yeah, of course. We're at war, brother. Go ahead." So, as I said, there are different levels of atrocity. One thing is a crime. Another thing is a horrible crime, which cannot be justified by law, which cannot be justified by any court. It can only be justified by God, maybe. I don't know if God can justify things like that. But what we see actually is a fact. Uh, there are propaganda tales which are thrown to us by Russian side, and there are facts. And the fact is that despite the promise that no civilian targets will be hit, civilians are dying in this war by thousands. But I've never been to Mariupol, frankly, but I saw pictures and I know that there is no more city of Mariupol, actually. The city was completely destroyed. This is what European people who are not in Ukraine do not understand. This city was not just shelled, it was not just bombed, it was completely devastated, like it never existed. But I stayed in Odessa still the very beginning, since the very beginning of war, and what I saw were shellings of civilian targets of Odessa. For example, on the 9th of May, and the 9th of May is a sacred date for Russians because the 9th of May is a victory day, while the whole world celebrates the 8th of May as the day of remembrance of the Second World War. Russian Federation celebrates Victory Day on the 9th of May because Russia claims that only due to the Soviet Union the Second World War ended and was won, obviously. So on the 9th of May, Russian missile completely destroyed a so-called Odessa Riviera Mall, which is, by the way, one of the biggest malls in Europe. Most definitely, there were no military targets in Odessa Riviera Mall. Fortunately, it was closed at that time, and no civilians were inside. Nobody but a couple of guards, But the place was completely destroyed, and there is no logical reason to that thing. More to say, there are other examples. For example, on Easter holidays, and Russia claims that it is a very religious country. They respect Christianity, and church plays a great role in whatever they do. So they do respect Easter. So during Easter holidays, they've sent another present to Odessa, and they have actually sent a rocket. I mean, this is hard. This is hard to believe in because it sounds like a complete delirium. They have actually sent a rocket that went right through a simple civilian building, a 16-story building. It went right through, and fortunately, for some reason, maybe caused by God, it did not explode. It just destroyed half of that building, but it did not explode. So after that happened, Russia declined that it sent any missile to hit that building. Instead, they said that they tried to hit a military store, something like that, which was situated behind the building. But you see, problem is that I live in the neighborhood. I live in the neighborhood, and I have a flat which is situated 50 meters from that place. And I do know that behind this building, there is a dentist place. There are a couple of little stores, a couple of supermarkets, and then there is a car wash, a very big one. So I believe that they were trying to hit a car wash because it's definitely a military target. Once again, what we see is that all they do has no logics. I mean, if you explain that atrocity to me, I will appreciate that because there are some things that I simply don't believe in. I've been to that place to that building after the shelling. I've seen the rocket, and man, I still don't understand why they did it. It's a vulgar display of power. It's a what was that?
Well, this week, European Union has given the best answer so far, and that's the designation of Russian Federation as a basically rogue state sponsor of terrorism.
Hmm.
Together with ISIL, their friends Taliban, and also the regimes of North Korea, which was, I believe, the only war in history fought by United Nations on the agreement of United Nations Security Council. So finally, Russian Federation has been attributed correctly to where it belongs, to the terrorists, the fanatics who would kill people just for the sake of their idea, regardless of what is this idea, is it good or bad, but this is absolutely conscious decision. And Dennis, you might have heard that actually after the Second World War, um, many countries, starting with Germany, have explicitly recorded in their rules for military the clause that it's absolutely a must to disobey the commander in case this commander is giving criminal orders. And that's exactly what was the person trying to do in 1983 before hitting the Korean liner. And for example, in 2014, I don't remember anybody feeling bad for mass murder. They were actually planning to mass murder people, except that there was a chance that they were aiming, for example, at the Ukrainian airplane, as if Ukrainians are less valuable human beings than, for example, 200 Dutch people. So that's terrorism, mm,
Okay,
plain and simple.
I can understand terrorism. I do not approve terrorism, most definitely, but I can at least understand the logic behind it, right? What I don't understand is what is the logics behind destroying a theater where 600 people are hiding or destroying a civil building by a missile which costs $2 or $3 million? What's the logics for any military to do that? So what I see and what I deeply believe in is that Russian authorities and Mr. Putin himself have lost their minds. It's a psychiatric case. They are schizophrenic. So whatever they do, whatever they claim, has no logics at all. And in this case, no treaties with them, no negotiations with them are possible because first of all, you cannot believe them. You know, they lie all the time. And secondly, whatever they say comes from the Twilight Zone, apparently. So you cannot find any reason for them shelling Odessa Mall. They just did it, and immediately after that, they said, "Okay, Odessa Mall was full of military guys. There were like 500 military Ukrainians killed in Odessa Mall." Come on, people! Come on,
Well,
people!
Dennis, I'd like to also mention that I think even Western world has finally came to understanding of the ridiculous claims by Russian military. For example, I've recently seen a meme of this Russian general staff speaker claiming that they've destroyed like 48 HIMARS and 4 Zelenskys.
Oh yeah.
So, like, seriously, are we still trying to find any truth in whatever Russian propaganda is
It's
pumping
not, it's
out?
not about truth. This is the time for the world to understand that no negotiation is possible with a crazy person. A crazy person has to be put in a psychiatric ward and treated accordingly with medications, with a lobotomy. I don't know, but definitely no discussion is possible. Because up till now, the big guys of this world, I'm talking about NATO, I'm talking about the United States of America, they're still trying to find a way to negotiate this war. There is no way to negotiate with these guys because today they will say, okay, 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 we agree with everything, and tomorrow they will bomb us again. Okay, anyway,
Well,
uh,
let me bring up an example from a very different side. You might have heard there is a street in Odessa named after Yitzhak Rabin, who was the Prime Minister of Israel, who
yeah,
actually managed to strike a deal with Palestinians.
right.
And there was the only hope for peace in maybe past half century. And so you might remember that this peacemaker was assassinated
Hmm.
mm, from a terrorist who was a religious fanatic, not from Palestinian, but from Israeli side. So just keep in mind that if you're trying to negotiate, say, with Putin, there is absolutely no guarantee that whatever treaty you strike will be observed, because you might have heard of Dugin, this famous propaganda philosopher of Russia, who
Hmm.
has suggested to execute Putin recently when the Kherson was liberated. This maybe call him crazy, but definitely Nazi guy. He just suggested that their country should be treated as not even dictatorship, but as a monarchy, where the ruler of this country, in case of a military defeat, should be sacrificed. Well,
Yeah,
obviously, to
that's what
serve
he said.
some dark gods of underworld, I guess.
No, and he was absolutely serious. We're talking about 21st century, and in the beginning of the 21st century, there is a very influential politician in Russia who literally suggests to sacrifice the political leader of Russia to, I don't know to whom, maybe to Cthulhu, in case Russia loses the war. It's amazing. So anyway, let's go a little bit back. A little back. The war started from Russia claiming that it will never hit civilian targets. Immediately after that, they started hitting civilian targets, but they've been saying that, oh no. It's not us, it's not our fault, it's not a civilian target, whatever. So they kept on claiming that civilian targets are not hit. And then they started losing the war. I mean losing it big time. And after they lost.
Well, they already lost half of the territory, I believe. There were a few verifications done, and the number is around 48%. Some claim it's slightly more than 50, some slightly less. But yes, the war is half lost for Russia already.
And most of the sacral, even religious places that they've taken over, like Kherson, for example, that was taken over by Russian forces shortly after the beginning of war, are also lost. So, and all out of a sudden, they stopped saying that they are not hitting civilian targets. And they have admitted that they will start hitting civilian targets like hydroelectric stations, power stations, whatever. And they have explained that by saying that if they hit electro stations and gas power supply stations and things like that, then Ukrainian people left without electricity, without water, without gas, and without everything, will rise against Zelensky. And that is also a clear evidence that Mr. Putin and his people have definitely lost their marbles, because Zelensky has nothing to do with them destroying our electricity supplies. But uh, I believe that the delirium of Russian propaganda and their deep beliefs deserves a whole podcast, and we'll talk about that maybe next time. What we should talk about now is about Russia started that how Russia started hitting energy system of Ukraine, and frankly speaking, I have to admit that we were not ready for that. I'm not talking about our military. The military is doing their best. They're great. But the civilians, we were not ready for that. We did not believe that it will happen. So the first attack was on the 10th of October, uh, uh, and 25% of Ukrainian electric power units were destroyed. And the funny thing about this attack is that Russia also tried to attack Kiev, and they have sent one missile, a big rocket, which hit a pedestrian bridge in the middle of Kiev. The funny thing about this bridge is that it was built of glass, and the bridge survived the explosion. But unfortunately, the energy system of Ukraine, 25% of it, did not survive. But did we feel it? I mean, the guys who live in Odessa, did we feel it? Frankly speaking, no. A couple of cities went black. A couple of regions went black, but Odessa people were like blessed. We had a couple of shortages, a couple of blackouts for a few hours only, and like children, we thought that it would be going on like that forever. So we were not ready for what was coming. And what came next was the second attack on the 15th of November, when Russia sent something like 75 or 80, I don't remember the exact quantity, quantity of rockets, and Ukraine went completely black. And that part we definitely felt, because for a couple of days, Odessa had really big problems with electricity. And when I say big problems, our viewers have to understand that it doesn't mean that we're out of electrical power only. It means that there is a possibility that some poor old lady is stuck in the elevator in the middle of nowhere and has to spend 24 hours in this elevator. It means that some doctor involved in the surgery cannot complete it because the hospital is blackout. But that situation was also managed. That situation was also managed. And once again, Odessa dwellers thought that they were blessed, because in a few days, everything was okay. And we started living our lives with 4 hours power blackouts every day. But we knew when it was coming. We had the schedules, and everything seemed to be okay. And the last hit was on the 23rd of November, and that was the most horrible one. So, but before we talk about the third one, which is bad, I mean, it's really bad. Let's talk about the second one, because if you remember, the second attack on the 15th of November was very important, because one of the rockets that was supposed to hit the electrical station in Lviv region went to Poland and killed 2 people there, and destroyed some infrastructure. And there is a big discussion about this rocket. United States officially said that it was not a Russian rocket, which definitely means that it was a Ukrainian rocket. Ukraine declined any connection with that rocket, and Mr. Zelensky has asked many times, actually, to take part in the investigation. But for some reason, Poland is a bit reluctant when it comes to sharing facts about that rocket. So, what do you think about that story? Was it a Russian rocket or was it us? I mean, even if it was us, let me state my position, then I will shut up. Even if it was us, it doesn't really matter because we did not hit Poland on purpose. We were trying to hit a Russian rocket that was going somewhere.
Yeah, see, I would decline to comment on that officially, but the denial of Russian origin of rocket could stem from rational thinking by politicians.
Yeah.
You say the rocket attack on the territory of a NATO member should automatically trigger not the Clause 5, surprise, it's the Article 4, which is not the all-out war, but the dangerous situation, and the entire NATO bloc, according to their doctrine, should rise and protect their member. However, I've paid a few hours to study the open sources about American nuclear doctrine, and it's very simple. Being rational people, applying science and not some Dugin or other crazy magical thinking,
Yeah.
they have calculated that the only way a potential nuclear war would develop would be into a full-scale nuclear war. So the US strategy is first we roll out the strategic bombers and put thousands, literally thousands, of small-scale nukes in those, and then wipe out Russia completely. So that's plain and simple. And obviously, I would say that if I were a decision maker, I would also think twice before going all out at once. I would say that there is still a chance that after 8 years that happened with this airplane, there would be the same result and they would find out who was indeed guilty. And was it really Ukrainian rocket, Russian? I also heard a version that there was a rocket combat going on with our air defense chasing the Russian rocket because those are actually programmable rockets that can follow some unusual path. For example, hiding going into the air space of Poland, which in this area seems to be unprotected. So burning down Moscow at once might be an option. The NATO leaders decided to keep, on
Avoid.
their table, but maybe not take rash decisions. This sounds horrible, for the relatives of those two people who were killed in Poland. But think of politicians' responsibility here. Once again, NATO is not Ruskies. They're
Mhm.
not war-crazed orcs. They don't have the plan to destroy our planet. That's what I think.
Yeah, but problem with modern Russian psychology is that they only understand brutal force. They do not understand diplomacy. And whenever any diplomatic decision is taken, Russians understand it as a sign of weakness. And after that happened, after NATO decided not to implement the fourth article or, God forbids, the fifth article, uh, what I told to my wife was brace yourself. Soon there's going to be another shelling, and it's going to be really big, and it's going to be really bad. And that's exactly what happened on the 23rd of November. Now, I do remember that day perfectly well because it was a good day actually. Pretty slow. I was trying to work since the beginning of war. Uh, uh, my office is abandoned. I work from home, But it was a slow day, so I didn't have much to do. And then all of a sudden, the power disappeared. The house went black, and immediately after that, the phone connection disappeared, and the internet disappeared just as well. And that's when I told my wife that something bad happened, and I was absolutely right. Actually, I don't know what these buggers hit, but they have actually blacked out not only most part of Ukraine, but they have blacked out most part of Moldova, which has technically nothing to do in this war. Uh,
Well,
and what happened?
except part of Moldova is occupied by Russia.
Yeah, we have to remember that. And what happened then, and what our viewers have to understand, is that starting from that day, electricity became a very rare guest in our houses. So this is how we live now. If we're lucky, we get 2 to 3 hours per day when there is an electrical supply in the houses. But there are places which were de-electrified for 6+ days and they're still without electricity. The temperature outside at this very moment is zero. Sorry, +1.
Yeah, and that's 0 Celsius, which is, I believe, like around 32 Fahrenheit.
Yeah, something like that. Uh,
So freezing temperature, basically.
People living in private houses, like me, for example, we have fireplaces, so we try to keep the temperature up by burning wood, obviously, because we cannot turn on the boilers or anything like that due to the fact that there is no electricity. And by using generators 24 hours a day, you will deploy all your financial savings very quickly, most definitely. There are generators everywhere now on the streets. Um but the most weak point of this whole story is that a large number of people living in the apartments, they cannot use generators, obviously, and they don't have fireplaces. They are suffering from cold. They are suffering from the lack of news, obviously, because there is no internet, and internet is sporadic, which means whenever there is light, there is internet. Whenever the light goes off, the internet goes off as well, and you don't know what's going on. Uh, During the first days after this attack, we were very short in water as well because water supply was cut off. Uh, Now, fortunately, everything is okay, and immediately after that, Russians started posting news about Odessa dwellers rioting against the regime of Zelensky, who has taken the electricity away from them. Now, that is complete bullcrap. Because yes, we definitely had a couple of cases when people downtown blocked the highways because their houses were completely out of electricity for 5+ days with a very low temperature inside. And the houses on the opposite side of the street were shining bright. But unfortunately, it's not a problem with the stupidity of our engineers. It's a problem with the transformators because some transformators survived the attack, some others did not. In order to They say that in order to fix the problem, we shall need 1 year, even if there are no more shellings. Even if Russia disappears tomorrow, we shall need 1 year. And up till that time, we'll be living like that. And I have to remind you that we're still only looking at winter, but winter is a couple of days away from us. And this winter, they say that this winter is going to be cold. Now, what I saw, I've been wandering around the city for these few days because I've been looking for a generator, and I've been looking for fuel, and I've been looking for water, for all sorts of things. And I've been wandering about around the city, and I was looking at people. Uh, it's a professional thing, I guess. I'm a writer, and I'm very interested in studying people's reactions to this or that situation. And this situation is really catastrophic for Odessa, believe me, because when you're driving around the streets and the streets are completely black, you think you start feeling yourself as a character from a horror movie. I've never seen Odessa that black, even in the 90s. But I've been looking at people, and I was wondering, what do they feel inside? Are they are they ready to give up? Are they close to giving up? No bloody way. They are not. So what happened after this episode, this horrible catastrophe, is that people became stronger. This is what I see. I see that Ukrainians became very strong. In case of in the I'm sorry, instead of going down on their knees and starting to plead with Putin to stop this war, they united. They became bigger. People are supporting each other. I've seen people who just come out with generators on the street, put a generator on the street, and offer everybody to charge their phones, to charge their notebooks from this generator for free. It's not a business thing. They just have a generator and they want to share it with everybody else. Most of the supermarkets started a thing which is called um, free electricity hubs, something like that. They offer electrical sockets for free. Definitely, they don't charge any money from the customers, and not only from the customers. You don't need to buy anything. You just walk into the supermarket. If you want to get warm, if you want to charge your notebook, you sit on the floor and you do whatever you want. But a few days after, uh, a couple of supermarkets organized safe places for Ukrainians so that Ukrainians do not have to sit on the floor. You know, they came up with small cozy chairs, sofas, tables, and now when you walk into a supermarket, what all you see is definitely something like a friendly hub. There are a bunch of people sitting around, uh, charging their computers, talking to each other. They are all very friendly, and they are most definitely not afraid of the future. But I am afraid of the future because once again, it's not winter yet. And I'm absolutely sure that this is not the last shelling, that we're going to see more bombs and that Russia will try its best to destroy our energy system. So, my greatest question is that do you think we shall survive these dark times? Because definitely the dark times are coming, and it's not a metaphor any longer. It's a reality. And how do you think? What will happen? Let's fantasize. Let's
Well, first of all, when you say unity, please don't forget that exactly the same situation with private generators being shared has been reported by my friends in Kiev and Lviv. So it's happening everywhere. Even my ex place of work, Rosetka, has literally confirmed its correct naming because they are practicing the same electricity sharing. So for as long as our people hold together, there is always a hope. On the other hand, I sure hope there would be some help from outside of Ukraine because this problem is way bigger than our country's limited capacity. Not many places in history have been subject to such a brutal attack because, you know, in modern days, people are actually, having panic attacks, out of virtually no reason. Like you and
Yes,
I,
absolutely.
when we grew up, the Generation X with a key on our neck without any cell phones, not speaking of smartphones, and we have survived and grown up into relatively successful people, and so that was entire our generation. However, yeah, I feel really sad for young people. I sure hope that experienced elders will help them. And similarly, I know that European Union, many countries are sending help into Ukraine, like generators, maybe even some help with pumping some electricity in. But I hope that there would be some more general drive in our neighboring countries to actually prevent the mass murder by cold and to stop the Nazi regime that's basically gone loose. And I guess our neighbors by now should understand that if Ukraine falls now, they will be the next. And, while traditionally I would say some maybe Westerners were frowning at Poland, Baltic states and other neighbors of Russia, then the tides have changed and say countries that have borders with Russia, like Norway and Finland and Sweden, which is very close to Russia, they finally turned to NATO for protection. So there might be growing understanding that this should be stopped before it's too late. As unfortunately, the too late sounds really dire for Ukrainians. The war in Yugoslavia was nothing as compared to what's happening now because they also had huge atrocities committed. They were suffering, and it's not possible to compare one person's suffering to another's, but the sheer scale of destruction in the large cities, cities of million inhabitants like Odessa, those cities, they are traps for people. Really, it's nowhere to go. And when terrorists decide to freeze people to death, we also don't have this benefit of, say, United States, where nearly everyone has some, ranch in Nevada or some relatives in the farm, and so in the days of crisis, there is somewhere to go. Maybe even some, food would be distributed because there is lots of charity going on in, say, U.S. But all of this, it works only when the disaster is of limited scale. And so, in addition to just helping Ukraine, it's necessary to think of how to stop the continuous missile attacks and ideally how to stop the war altogether, because now we're guaranteed to have millions of refugees moving to Europe because some people they try to return.
Hmm. Hmm.
However, I would not advise, for women with children staying in Ukraine under such harsh conditions. Also, we shouldn't think of the weather because in most of the Western Europe, the weather is very mild as compared to the weather in Ukraine. Being on the
Hmm.
Baltic Sea, I'm slightly more used to winters. But like it's 6 degrees Celsius in Oslo now. It's above zero.
Hmm.
That's Oslo. Only Sweden, Finland, and Baltic states they feel similar weather to Ukraine. So this might be the actual reason why they were the first to try to protect the Ukraine because they understand what is living in harsh weather conditions. So yeah, I hope there would be some help coming from outside. Otherwise, my advice is just run.
Um, what what our what the Western world, what the European world, what the United States of America has to understand is that there is no way Mr. Putin and his tiny little animals he calls his army will force Ukrainians to kneel in front of him. Instead of kneeling, we're only becoming stronger. But we don't need, we do appreciate all the support the world gives to us. We greatly appreciate it. But what we need is weapons. What we need is the ATACMS rockets, for example, that are long distance rockets. What we need is more support from NATO. What we need is for the free world to understand that we're all fighting against the same enemy. And it's not a political war. It's not a diplomatic war. This enemy has no morals, has no soul at all whatsoever. They're literally planning to depower Ukraine completely by the middle of winter. And if this winter is going to be cold, regardless how strong we are, elderly people will die, poor people will die, maybe millions will die during this winter, not only due to cold, but not only due to weather conditions, but due to diseases, due to the lack of water, the lack of power, etc., etc., etc. So million reasons. We can win this war. If Europe doesn't want to interfere, I don't understand that because, of course, after all, Europe is blessed for not being the arena. The arena is Ukraine. As soon as God had chosen us to be the arena for the most devastated war in 21st century, we want the world to support us not only with money, not only with advice, not only with the words of grief, etc., which we do appreciate, by the way, as well, but with literally more sophisticated weapons, with the weapons that may cause Russia to understand that the times of diplomacy are over. Because if Ukraine starts hitting Russia back after every missile attack, these missile attacks will be over in no time, you know? We're just trying to be more civilized than they are. But there is no way to be civilized in this war. That's the problem. If we stay civilized, millions will die. Not military guys, civilians, young mothers with infants, elderly guys, they will all perish. And I'm absolutely sure that regardless what the world says, okay, we do appreciate that the European Union thinks that Russia is a country that supports terrorism, which obviously sounds a little bit weird because Russia is a terrorist state, but definitely it supports itself. We do appreciate that NATO states the same, but we would more appreciate weapons, more weapons, and more weapons. And the world already saw that Ukraine can definitely win this war. We have taken Kherson back. We have taken Kiev region back. We have taken Kharkiv region back. We'll take over the whole area of Ukraine and we'll secure it. But it's not enough. Russia has to capitulate. And only that may save the world, because if we fall, tomorrow it will be Poland. The day after tomorrow, it will be Lithuania. And by the way, Lithuania, Latvia, and Estonia, they do understand it completely. And that is why their politicians are so adequate in terms of expressing their points of view, because they understand that if Ukraine falls, tomorrow Putin will come to Latvia and says, "Hello, I'm here to save the Russian population of Latvia from themselves." The day after tomorrow, he will come to Poland, and what will happen then? Sky's the limit for this guy. So it's not time to negotiate. Winter is already here, and I'm talking to you at the moment. I feel myself really lucky that I can see you, that I have the electric lamp, which still works. But at any moment, our podcast may be over due to the fact that any moment the electricity may be gone. And whenever it is gone, I have a question which I never asked my wife. Will it ever be back? Will it ever be back? But once again, no shellings, no destructions, no Russian attacks will ever break Ukrainians. Whatever the propaganda says, we are now stronger, bigger, and way more motivated than we were 8 months ago.
Yeah, great to hear that. Let me just return to the initial discussion. You say Ukraine has been also retaliating inside the Russian territory, not just occupied territory like Crimea, but for example, they were disabled a few gas and fuel storages by the border where the Russian army was getting their supplies. And imagine that with the same Soviet grade weapons as Russia has, even though Russia is claiming to have some superior weapons, superior maybe even to the Western ones, but the fact is that multiple successful operations of Ukraine against enemies, say fuel, supply, and railroads, caused virtually no losses. There are rumors that a few Russian citizens were indeed hurt somewhere in the border area, but dealing with the terrorist country that doesn't care about the health and lives of any people, we cannot verify Russians' claims because they would be always denying, and we know that they do kill people all the time. So I would say that if we are lucky and we finally get weapons powerful enough to hit not just the Crimea and military bases along Ukrainian border, but potentially also even Moscow or Grozny, capital of Chechnya, this might have a very good deterrence effect. Basically, the same way it was after Second World War, when there were multiple cases when the world was heading for the nuclear strikes exchange. For example, there was infamous Caribbean crisis. There was a less known case, I believe, also around the time when they shut down the airplane. I think it was 1984 when there was a false alarm on some Soviet system, and there was a nuclear strike under consideration. Fortunately, this time the military managed to convince their bosses that it's not time to annihilate the planet. And of course, there was a mentioned war in Korea, which was kind of opposite example because though it was sanctioned by United Nations and U.S. Turns out from the open sources now the formerly secret documents were revealed. The President Eisenhower, if I'm not mistaken, was indeed considering the nuclear weapons application in Korea because a 20 million strong Chinese army was advancing towards the border. But you could see when the force was brought to sufficient level to stop the aggressor, Korea is separated in two halves. One is de facto occupied by China, one independent. But this war at least stopped causing huge casualties. Think of the period between 2015 and 2022 when Ukraine had built sufficient defenses and the count of casualties, as you mentioned in the previous video, went nearly to zero.
Absolutely.
So, yes, Russia is stoppable. This is no magic, no secret how to do that.
Oh,
Brutal force.
this is what the whole world has to understand. This is what I've been saying today a couple of times, and I'll say it again. We're limited in time, so I believe we have to recap, we have to finalize. But the time of diplomacy is over. That is one thing. Another thing, you're absolutely right. Russia has to be taught a lesson. They're not unstoppable. They are not some sort of a mystical rider of apocalypse, the second army in the world, as they used to call themselves. From the end, maybe, I don't know. Um, they do understand only brutal force. We're not asking the world to hit the civilian targets of Moscow, like Russia would definitely be doing, was doing for more than 8 months of this war. But if Ukraine had a missile that would be able to hit Moscow electric power units and black out the capital of Russian Federation, that would most definitely be a lesson that they will learn. And one day they will most definitely learn it. Up till that time, we'll try to survive. We'll try our best to live our lives. And from our side, we'll try our best to deliver our podcasts on a more frequent basis. Uh, I wanted to announce a next podcast saying that we shall talk about the history of this war and blah blah blah. But now I'm not sure what we'll be talking about next time, because this war is so so full of bloody horrible surprises. You never know what's going to happen next. So let's hope that we'll be talking to each other next time, at least. We'll be well and alive. I wish you a very safe night, Slav. And I guess that's it for today.
Yeah. Same to you, and remember the words of our national anthem.
Oh,
Peace.
yes. Peace, man. Bye bye.